Hey guys, it's kind of a rainy, overcast day today, so I'm not getting a whole lot done. And what I am doing right now is I want to make a video about Vermont history. I think this is a very niche subject matter that most people probably know nothing about, and I have had some interest in it because I was born in Vermont, and that was where I grew up for my first years up until age 7, and then I moved back to Vermont later on in life when I was around, I don't know, 20-ish, something like that, and was in Colorado in between there. So Vermont, one thing that distinguishes Vermont from any other state in the United States is that Vermont was an independent republic, was its own independent. This is where we start to get into the thick of it, the words that we use. So country, state, nation are all words that can be seen as synonyms, but are actually different. So a state is a trust, that is a contract amongst parties, and then relative to a geographic area. A nation is relative to people, a collective of people. And then a country is strictly geographical. So when you say the country, you're talking about like the land, the geography. So Vermont, in its constitution, boy, this is a deep one. You're gonna have to be patient with me because it's gonna be difficult. The difficulty of this block is high. It's high difficulty. It's gonna take a lot of time to hash it out. I'm realizing that the blockchain in my life, even whether it's physically real or it's the placebo effect, having the reference point of the blockchain helps me more fully understand my existence, in fact. And back to the subject matter, Vermont. Cannabis obviously causes more tangential tracks to be taken, but it can also cause more insight beyond the ego. So we got a whole mix of things going on. But at 3.5 minutes in, just know this is the goal of this is all Vermont history. And if you're not interested in that, just tune out now. So here's the story of Vermont history. We'll start around the 1700s when the native tribes in the area living around this inland lake, nowadays called Lake Champlain, which largely separates Vermont and New York. It's technically not one of the Great Lakes, but it's one of the biggest lakes next to the Great Lakes. And it also has its own drainage basin, separate from the other Great Lakes, which are all connected from Lake Champlain. Which, first tangent, I don't like the name Lake Champlain because Champlain was just some French explorer guy who came through and found it and then just named it after him when obviously it had a name before that. And I don't like to refer to just like the random explorer that explores the thing and call it that. But for lack of better reference, I'll keep calling it Lake Champlain. Vermont Lake would be even better than Lake Champlain because Vermont is kind of a name that just arose out of nature, green mountains, and basically the the line between Vermont and Canada is a geographic boundary, just like the line between Vermont and New York is a geographic boundary, as it is between Vermont and New Hampshire. So there's a river on the east, a lake on the west, there's plains on the north, and then what's down south? I guess it would be, I don't know. So the first European people in Vermont were the French, probably like the trappers and stuff. And the French Canada was originally a French colony. So Canada didn't become British until after a war much later, maybe 1812 or one of these later on wars, 7 Years' War maybe. So the French ended up largely in that Lawrence River, going from the Great Lakes out to the Atlantic, where Montreal and Quebec are both along that river. That was like their main place where they set up. And then the British are mostly set up on the East Coast, and they've got like sea dominance, and their whole jurisdiction is all, and the states that they create are all based off of the maritime law and how the waterways shed into the ocean. And that's the extent, essentially, and how they determine the end of the colony is a certain number of miles from basically the end of the rivers that are feeding out to certain rivers, and that because the whole colonies were all set up by maritime law. So Vermont was the country of Vermont was separate and in between, separate from both of those and in between them also. So because of the Lake Champlain being a separate water basin, it didn't really have, it lacked clarity as far as the maritime law of the British, and because it was south of the whole Canada and kind of in between, it had this space of being in, but not specifically in either one, and kind of in between, and that created a certain amount of distinction and independence for it. Then later on, when as the colonies of the Crown of England, as they're selling rights to the countries which they're granted jurisdiction and authority of by authority of the Crown, which claims sovereignty over the seas, which is maritime law. I need a moment for that one to sink in. Okay, lost myself after that. And then, so as those governors are selling claims to that land, which they call property rights, to people who want to settle that land. So this is an important point. So the origination of the claim to the land rests in the Crown's claim via maritime law, and then they set up the governor who claimed via the Crown to have authority of the land to sell it to the settlers. So like they just set up shop and say, oh, all of this area we're just going to start selling it. So it's a very profitable venture to do, and the only counter to that is either competition from the other crowns trying to do the same thing, or from the local inhabitants, the natives, who might push back if they don't want their lands settled. So New York and New Hampshire, they both started selling claims to the land of Vermont. So some settlers started buying claims from the New Hampshire government to settle their claims, and then later New York said that they actually had jurisdiction over this area, and then they had to get it settled in London because the crown has the authority between these territory disputes among their different governors. And so that takes a long time, and then there's all this different conflict that arises where at some point there's like sheriffs that are elected or empowered or something from New York who are coming with like hundreds or thousands of militia, or sometimes they might be foreign mercenaries and just coming and kicking people out or stealing their property, or just abuse against Vermont, because of its status, basically, because effectually the crown didn't have authority or any claim to this land, because so specifically, I guess the land that this is coming to me right now. So specifically, the definition of Vermont, the country of Vermont, would be the land which sheds water to the lake of Vermont Lake, or whatever that lake, whatever name is used for that lake. So that would actually change so the state of Vermont, actually part of it is shedding to the east to that river, and then part of it is shedding to Lake Champlain, and then obviously northern New York State, a lot of that is shedding to Lake Champlain. So the country of Vermont actually overlaps with claims of the state of New York, and might not include the entirety of the state of Vermont, if that makes sense. So, due to the nature of the claim of authority being maritime law by right of the governors through the crown, which is claiming that the colonies which they established don't have any claim to the land which sheds water to the lake, which is called Lake Champlain. And maybe due to this reason from their perspective, or just due to this reason, there was conflict between the different governors of the colonies about who had authority there. So then, once again, Vermont is in the middle, and the conflict between the two colonies result in abuse and also independence from those two. So what ends up happening is that the Green Mountain Boys are formed. So Vermont, Ver and Mont, Green Mountain, and so it's like whether the original French influence, and then the English influence, and then so that's another thing. Without going on too much of a tangent, but the whole nature of Canada, the French influence is largely there in that St. Lawrence Seaway, where the French had the initial influence, so Montreal and Quebec and that kind of area. But even though that's all British, so okay, back to Vermont. I gotta work on the even saying tangent reversion. The Vermont being in between the two colonial claims, and so they end up setting up the Green Mountain Boys, which was led by Ethan Allen, who, I guess I only have a minute left. I can't finish the story. I just got to Ethan Allen. Okay, so I guess this is just part 1 in the Vermont history series. So this is something that interests me, and I think because it interests me and I'm looking into it, I'm getting a perspective to be able to tell a story. I think stories are the best way for information to be conveyed. And then if anyone else is interested in this story, they'll be able to find it later on, and the story can continue in its modern day time. But I'm out of storage on the phone right now, and so I'm going to cut it there until part 2. After I delete some phone space.